Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Hello to anyone who is listening to this later on via Temple Beth Am's podcast. Nice to be back studying with you in the midst of really complicated things that are happening in our world, in our Jewish world every day. It's nice to spend an hour a week focused just on text, just on ideas. And hopefully the heat will be turned off in this room and we can start breathing again. It is very hot in Whiteman Conference Room right now.
Rabbis, is there class the next 2 weeks, or what's the
Yeah.
So Christmas week as well?
What day?
So,
Yeah.
okay with me.
Yeah. What day of the week is Christmas? Yeah.
Monday.
Yeah. I expect to teach the 20th, the 27th. Yeah. Originally I was going to be away in Israel this week and next week with a Pressman trip, but obviously that got canceled. So I'm actually now in town. Okay. We are on chapter 8, verse 25. Haven't read the Rashi yet. And as I told you last week, Rashi's gonna, it's one of his tersest comments. He basically just adds a letter to a word and it makes us figure out what it is that's in the verse or in the construction of the word as it appears in the Torah that made him feel like he had to say something and what he's adding to it. And we'll have to ask, is this a purely grammatical thing that he's working on, or is there some content that he's playing with as well? The verse to remind us in verse 25, which we've now spent a lot of time on, but let's just say it again. Chapter 8, verse 25, Vayomer Moshe, Moses said, Hinei anochi yotzeh me'imach, here I am leaving from you. V'ha'atarti el Adonai, I will plead to God. The sar ha'arov, we discussed this could either mean that God is the subject of sar and it's a causative, God will remove the arov, or the subject of sar is arov, that the arov will depart. Mi paro, from Pharaoh, he's now speaking to Pharaoh in the royal third person. Ume avadav, and his servants. Ume amo, and his nation. Machar, tomorrow. Rak al Yosef paro, but Pharaoh, let not Pharaoh continue. Hatel, and we looked at the BDB. Hatel can mean to deceive. It can also mean to mock. And we discussed how in English, those are two very different ideas, both of which are things you wouldn't want, your child to learn how to do, but they're very different, to deceive and mock. And in Hebrew, it somehow means both. Onkelos translates it as leshakara, meaning to lie, to deceive. And now it's qualified. Let Pharaoh no longer do whatever hatel means. The vilti shalach et ha'am, by refusing to, by not dispatching the people, lizboach l'Adonai, to sacrifice to God as we have been asking to do. Okay, it's a long, complicated verse. In all of that, the only thing that Rashi is commenting on is the word hatel. Okay, so we discussed the origin of hatel, that it means to deceive or to mock. We didn't discuss what grammatical form hatel is in. Does anyone want to, before we look at the Rashi, I'm kind of leading the witness, anybody want to weigh in, particularly the grammar nerds here, on what form hatel is in, or you might want to go at it, what form you would have imagined hatel to be in? That was just Joel taking the time to get the microphone. Yeah,
it should be infinitive, but it looks like it's imperative.
Good. All right. So you're on Rashi's wavelength. If you say this in Hebrew or English, whatever the meaning of hatel means, it should be in the construct of an infinitive. Pharaoh should not continue, Yosef, to do something. Right? Whatever it is that it means, it should be an infinitive form, right? Al Yosef le, he should not continue to deceive or to mock. And it looks like imperative in the sense that if the verb is lehatel, the way you would give an imperative form of it to a single male person would be hatel, right? How do you say to speak in Hebrew? Lidaber. How do you tell someone to speak? Daber, right? Lishalem is to pay. If you're speaking to a male, a single male, and you need him to pay something, say shalemli, right? So hatel looks like an imperative. It should be an infinitive. That's what Rashi is going to be responsive to. Joanna's hand was up, but now it's down.
I was going to say the same thing. We're good.
Okay. So, Joel, since you were the first one to kind of jump into that, why don't you read the very long Rashi that you basically already said?
Hatel kmo lehatel.
Right. Okay. So Rashi says this word hatel, you know what it really should be? Lehatel, right? Meaning you're wondering why it's not an infinitive. It should be infinitive. You're wondering why it looks like an imperative. It's not really an imperative. And he's not really, he's got some backing, right? First of all, it would make no sense for it to be an imperative here. And in some of the super commentaries on Rashi, it points us to other places in the Torah where what should be an infinitive is written without the lamed. What's fascinating to me about this is that that's normally something that Rashi does for us. Rashi usually sends us on that in that map. Like here are 3 other verses where this is going on, and he doesn't do it here, but some of the super commentaries do. So look, I'm going to put Breshit 8:10 on the board, because you don't have that in front of you, just have Shemot. Second. Okay, so Breshit 8:10, Parshat Noach. Let's see how this is similar to the construct that we were just discussing. Vayachel od shivat yamim. This is Noach waited another 7 days, acherim. Vayosef, and then he continued, or sort of did again, shalach et hayonah min hateva. What should the word shalach have been? Lishaleach, or lishloach, right? And it's actually the same verb in front of it. Vayosef, he continued, and here again, the continue just means a second time, to send. But it's written as send. It's written like it's imperative, very similar to our situation, okay? One more. We're going to look at a verse that some of you know well from other context. Micha, the prophet Micha, chapter 6, verse 8. This is a famous verse because it's often quoted as a way of saying, when it comes down to it, is it ritual that God wants from us, or is it to act righteously? So people love to quote Micha, and appropriately, right? You can counter quote Micha too. Right? So, we're not just a people of modesty, we're also people of ritual. But when you're trying to convince someone that their overly pious prayers that are not followed by righteous acts is not the way to do a Jewish life, Micha is one of the verses you go to, okay? Higid lecha Adam. Micha is saying, God has kind of spoken to me, human. Ma tov, what is good? Uma Adonai doresh mincha. What does God really seek from you? Ki im asot mishpat, it is rather doing justice, the ahavat chesed, and the love of piety and of loving kindness, the hatzne alecha im Elohecha, and to walk humbly with your God. What Hebrew word in there is written? La'asot. What does God expect from you? In person? Wow. Hi, Rick. Wow. Rick Meller just walked in. It's like 2019 all over again. Okay. Right. So what would we say in English or in Hebrew? God requests that from you to do something. La asot mishpat, but it's written as asot. Here, asot, because the form doesn't look like an imperative, it kind of looks like a gerund, like the doing of justice. These are 2 examples that Rashi doesn't take us to directly, which again is kind of strange. Rashi normally would do that, but the super commentaries say, look at these verses and it's the same thing going on. Lamed is missing. It's clearly an infinitive. Don't try to read it any other way. Barry, take a microphone.
Well,
I don't think it's on yet. Okay.
Well, one way to look at this is because you mentioned lasot, so what's required is the doing of. And to bringing that back into this verse here, don't let Pharaoh have the deceiving of.
Yeah, in some ways, Barry, your comment on Micha, it's possible to read the Micha line without an infinitive better than it is to read our verse, because the doing of It's the same meaning.
But the-
To do and the doing of is the same thing. And you can read that verse to mean that what does God request of you? God requests of you the doing of mishpat.
And this is to don't allow the deceiving. Don't let deceiving happen.
Yeah, except that in our verse, hatel does not look like a gerund the way asot does, right? So you can read asot as the doing of. Hatel, the form of it doesn't mean anything other than either an infinitive without a lamed or an imperative which doesn't make sense in the verse.
I mean, if we're making pretzels, we could do that.
That's true. Okay, that's Rashi on hatel, and the only thing he says in the verse. Any other comments on it before we go on? What did he say? What did Joel say?
It was a reference to the fact that they were going to hightail it out of there.
That they were going to hightail it?
Hightail it out of there.
Well, but what did you say?
What?
But what was the word that you said I didn't hear?
No, the hatel is a reference.
Oh, hot tail. Joel, you must not get a lot of sleep because it takes a lot of hours in the middle of the night to come up with those puns. Hot tail. Very nice. Okay. Verse 26. You still have the mic, Joel, and you got a Rashi without a pasuk. So why don't we give you a pasuk? Read verse 26, please.
Vayitze Moshe me'em paro vaya'atar el Adonai.
Okay.
And God left from, Moshe left from Paro, from the presence of Paro. Va'ater, to disappear, no?
No, this is the same root as 25, where he says "Hatarti el Adonai," to plead or to pray.
Plead to God, and he supplicated to God.
Good. All right. If you're focusing again on the me'im is an older biblical way to refer to like the presence of someone. It's sort of built on if one of the things that means is with, like it would sound clunky in English, but Moshe left from being with Pharaoh. That's how me'im is constructed, but it means he left Pharaoh's presence. If you look at the Unkelis, unafak Moshe, nafak is the Aramaic for to go out. Mean kadam paro, from being in front of, from the presence of Pharaoh. That tzali, we discussed this last time. Tzali is the Aramaic. Tzali in Hebrew means to roast, but tzali in Aramaic means to pray, as in titkabel, slow tone, right? May our prayers be received from God's presence. Okay, short verse. We sort of knew this was coming because that's what we were told is going to happen in verse 25, right? Moshe says, I'm going to leave from you and I'm going to pray to God. So verse 26 says he left from Pharaoh and he prayed to God, right? Any thoughts or comments on the verse before we see what Rashi is dealing with in the verse? Anything jump out at you? Right? It's really sort of what this verse is telling you what basically the thing that we were told was going to happen in the first half of verse 25 happened in using the same verbs, right? Ani anochi yotze me'imach, I'm going to leave from you. And now it says vayetze me'im paro, and vahatarti el Adonai, I'm going to plead to God. Vayetar el Adonai, he pleaded. Is it both? Can you say either? He pleaded with God. Thoughts, comments before we look at Rashi? Okay, let's look at Rashi. Joel, do one more. And again, we have to ask the question, is what Rashi's going for here just content, just grammar, or both? The last comment was just grammar, right? He was just disabusing us of the notion that hatel means anything other than lehatel. We can ask that question on this comment as well.
Vayater Paro nit ametz b'tfilah. He worked really hard in prayer.
I think that's a good way of saying it, right? Ometz means courage or strength. Lehitametz means to summon yourself to be strong and resolute in your prayer. So Rashi's saying that, and we don't know yet why he's saying this, that our image of Vayetar Adonai, that he prayed to God, is that he kind of mustered himself in prayer. Okay, let's understand Rashi's words, and then we'll try to figure out what Rashi is saying.
וכן אם בא לומר ויעתיר, היה יכול לומר
I put a period there.
Okay.
What do you think that phrase means?
לכן, אם בא לומר,
Who or what is the subject of the ba lomar?
Moshe. No?
Nope. Because Moshe is not speaking in this verse. It's sort of hard. You have to kind of really know Rashi well, which you all do, to understand how he's saying it here. It's the writer, right? It's the implied author of Im Ba Lomar. It's the Holy One. It's God. It's the Torah itself. Meaning, had the Torah wanted to say Vaya'atir, now we don't know yet why Vaya'atar and Vaya'atir are so different. So again, we're going to understand Rashi's words and then figure out why he's saying it. Had he, the unnamed he who is the author, God, wanted to come to say Vayatir,
You would have been able to.
he would have been able to. Meaning, like, don't think that Vayatar is a mistake. It could have been Vayatir, right? And just if we play this out, the difference is a pa'al, simple version of a verb, and a he feel causative, right? So Vayetar, and because the first root is a guttural, it's not going to look like your normal pa'al verbs, but it's pa'al. It's the simplest form of the root ayin taf resh. Leha'atir is the causative, the he feel, the making someone else do something or an intensifying. And if you look at verse 25, when Moshe says what he's going to do, veha'atarti, that certainly looks like he's promising to do a he feel, a causative. Whatever it means, he doesn't say how would we say it in pa'al? The atarti, right? The hey in front of atarti suggests that what Moshe is promising to do is whatever the root atar means in he feel, that's what he's promising to do. Most times in he feel, it's a causative. It's making someone else to do something. Not always. And I'm trying to think of a good example where it looks causative because it's he feel, but it really means a multiplying or intensifying. And that's important to understand what Rashi's saying. But so far in the comment, all he's saying is, had God wanted to write this as Vayatir in he feel, God could have, but God didn't. God wrote it as Vayatar. Therefore, we're getting to his therefore.
Umashma v'yarbe b'tfilah.
And by the way, it's a misplaced therefore. Had it been Vayatir, it would have meant Vayarbe b'tfilah, which means
To multiply in or to, yeah.
to say a lot of prayers, to daven a lot of tefillot. That's what Rashi thinks Vayatir means. Meaning, and I know this is getting clunky, Rashi thinks that the root atar in he feel causative does not mean to cause someone else to pray, but it means to pray a lot of things, to redouble your prayer. It didn't say that, so that's not our image of Moshe. However, keep going. Achshav.
No, Achshav.
You don't have an achshav?
No.
What's your next word?
Uveshahu.
Okay, I have achshav kshehu. Okay, they're different versions.
Uveshahu omer b'lashon v'yif'al mashma v'yobe lehitpalel. So, but here when it says, when it uses the
pa'al, right? That's Rashi's way of saying pa'al, yeah.
The meaning is to multiply or to pray very much, as opposed to saying a lot of prayers.
And doesn't that seem like the exact same thing?
Yeah.
Right. So it's really hard to figure out what Rashi is getting at. I think the key is the nit ametz batfila, the mustering himself. For some reason, using the grammar, Rashi, rather than wanting us to imagine like Moshe fervently praying a lot of prayers, it's anachronistic anyway to imagine Moshe like davening. It's more important for Rashi to have us imagine Moshe summoning with strength the ability to pray in the first place. And I think what's going on, but I don't know for sure, is that it's almost unseemly for Rashi to imagine Moshe as davening fervently for Pharaoh. It's easier for Rashi to imagine Moshe figuring out, mustering the ability to actually find even one moment that he's comfortable praying on Pharaoh's behalf, right? And it's a subtle difference, but it's a difference, right? One is, it wasn't hard for Moshe to pray. He started praying, and once he started praying, he never stopped. according to Rashi, that would be vaya'atir. But vaya'atar is he had to like get the strength, the additionalness is not in the amount of prayers, but in what Moshe had to like summon within in order to actually be able to stand in prayer at all. Right? So again, my guess is that it's a discomfort in seeing Moshe as being such a ready supplicant on Pharaoh's behalf. Their hands up. I see Barry's hand, and then I see Joanna's hand.
Going back to that, the comment that this is the writer creating this, and I'm imagining the how a play is written for actors. So Moshe is an actor in this play, and that the script in the parenthesis on the sides tells him how he's going to do this, and so he's being told you're going to do it this way, not that way. Rashi is definitely saying the focus is on the one who is praying, as opposed to the amount of prayers. Why he's saying that, it's a mystery. Joanna?
I have a slightly different take on this, I think. If you look back to verse 8:5, Moshe is in conversation with Paro, and the verb appears there in the he feel. So I almost feel like Rashi is saying, we saw this once before in the he feel. Why didn't we stay with the he feel? Why did we change the verb form here?
I think I'm going to yes and you, right? He doesn't say that explicitly, but he is commenting on the fact that it's changed from Hefil to Pa'al. But it's hard to be certain as to what he thinks the switch from Hefil to Pa'al means. But I think you're right. Moshe promised a Hefil praying. He offered a Pa'al praying. There's got to be a reason for that. Rashi's explanation of the reason is somehow it's not an extended number of prayers, but rather an extended effort to pray. But the why on the why is hard to be certain about, and the super commentaries on Rashi don't help so much here. So sometimes we just don't have an answer. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. He's recognizing that there's a switch in the form, and if you look back, where is it? Look at verse 5 in chapter 8. So this is this frogs? Yeah, this is in the end of the frog plague, when Moshe is kind of toying with Pharaoh, like, you tell me exactly when you want me to remove them and I will. So you're going to think that you're in power because you get to dictate the moment, but it's actually a reinforcement of my and God's power, because you tell me 8:21 in the morning, that's what's going to happen. That's how powerful I am. And look at the form of the verb. Vayomer Moshe leFaro, Moses said to Pharaoh, Hitpa'er alai, I'm allowing you to lord over me a little bit, regarding Lamatai a'atir lecha, when I will plead on your behalf. What form is atir? Hefil. I know the hay isn't there. Otherwise, it would have been etar. So we've had Moshe keeps promising Hefil, but when he actually does it, it's Pa'al, and Rashi is trying to learn something from that. Yes, Barry.
So, I mean, if you go back to again the writer, to be effective to God, and we've seen it elsewhere in the prophets. What's required of us is purity. So to plead, it's not superfluous words. You need to make the plea. So he may say he's going to do such and such, but to be effective, he has to do it this way.
Yeah. That's all Rashi says on that verse. Anything else? Yes, Leonard. Let's give Leonard a microphone.
Ibn Ezra has a much simpler explanation.
Okay, I can pull it up while you're discussing it.
Ibn Ezra says that there's a few words, not very many, where the kol and the hefil mean exactly the same thing. Here's one of them.
Let's take a look. So I'm going to put it on the screen. Okay. Can someone just go move that black bar so that we can see it there? Vayetze. Yeah. Just click that. Or just move it to the left side of the page. Click on the black.
Two hands.
Okay, while Elon is trying to figure that out, what Ibn Ezra, and you can see most of it in the room, Yesh milot b'lashon hakodesh, there are words in Hebrew, shehein shavot batam, have the same meaning, behem mishnei binyanim, even when they are in the same binyan, the same form. Mehakel umehachbed, right, when, by the way, every century or so, it seems in medieval Jewish commentary, the words they use to describe biblical grammatical terms changed. So for Ibn Ezra, what we call the pa'al, he's calling the kal. Some people learn as kal also. And what we call the hifil, he's calling the hachbed, which is like an intensifier. Kamo bayetar el Adonai v'hatarti el Adonai. So he says that the word, and he prayed to God, and I will pray to God, even though they're in different binyanim, they mean the same thing. And he gives a couple other examples. Yeah, so Ibn Ezra says nothing to see here, essentially. Okay, and Ibn Ezra might be right, because Rashi, it's not that Rashi's comment seems tortured, it's that it's hard to know exactly what we're supposed to draw out of it, right? Sometimes cigars are cigars. All right.
Rick has a question.
Rick, yes. Let's give Mick the microphone.
Leave it here? Do I need to hold it?
You need to get it pretty close to your mouth.
Okay. I'm glad Tova came, because I was going to ask you about Egypt. So, what we know about Egypt is that when you died, you had to go to each of the gods and entreat to them and pass a question, and then you could go to the next one where they measured your heart against the feather. We've talked about that. So Moses is telling Pharaoh, I'm going to do this. So his audience is Pharaoh. And what does Pharaoh want to hear? That he's going to go to the gods, like Pharaoh goes to the Egyptian gods and entreats. So I want to ask about whether there's the idea that Moses isn't forcing God to do something. He's just asking God to do it, whether that's Hifil or Pa'al. I think Rashi doesn't want to have Moses telling Pharaoh that he's going to make God do something. It's just for Pharaoh's ears to hear that. I don't know, but there's something going on there about whether he has the power to make the God do something or not.
I hear you in the content of what you're saying. It's hard to graph that onto the raw grammar, because if atar in the Hifil is causative, it wouldn't be Moshe causing God to release or to stop. It would be Moshe causing God to pray, and that wouldn't make any sense, right? Because the root means to entreat. So it's sort of impossible to read this as causative, because to say that Bahatarti el Adonai, it's not that I caused God to plead, right? And that would be the only way of rendering it in the causative. I was just looking at BDB to see if there's any hints there in the different forms of atar. So I'm going to share the screen also. And again, if there are any hints about the things it means in different forms, it's actually drawn from our verses. So BDB says that the root atar means to pray or to supplicate, always to God. Remember, we looked at it last time. In the nifal, which makes sense, is to be supplicated, be entreated, because it's happening to you. Yeah. And look at that. Look at this where my cursor is. Hifil equals kal. He basically agrees with Ibn Ezra, right? When this verb appears in the Hifil, which is normally causative, all it means is kal. Kal is another way of saying pa'al, just to make supplication. Yeah. So Rashi, yeah, you were working too hard, Rashi. Good. Anything else on that verse? We're looking at the next one. Okay. Marshall, do you want to read verse 20? It's 27, I believe. And as just a little preview, as you're translating Vayasar Ha'arov, it's going to be the same double possibility grammatically as 2 verses ago in terms of who the subject is. Go ahead.
We can't hear Marshall.
Oh, right. Marshall didn't have a microphone. So far, all Marshall's done is read a verse, but he did it very well.
Okay. So he removed whatever this arov means.
Well, first Vayas.
Oh, I'm sorry. God did according to Moses, according to the word of Moses, and he removed the arov. I'm not sure exactly what the word arov means here.
Well, it's whatever we understand this plague to be, right? So the arov, right, it's either the wild beasts or the insects, but whatever it is, it's removed.
From Pharaoh and from his servants and from his people.
Right.
Not one of these things remained.
Good. And we can translate Vayasar Ha'arov either as the subject is pulled forward from Vayas Adonai and God removed, or like in the previous verse, the arov removed, the ramov disappeared, right? It's hard to know if Vayasar, again, Pa'al or Hifil, because if it's Hifil, then God is doing the removing, or it could just be the plague itself got removed, okay? Lo nishar chad, not one remained.
Okay, so let me just read Robert Alter's translation.
Sure.
And the Lord did according to Moses' word, and the horde turned away from Pharaoh and from his servants and from his people. Not one remained.
Right. So Alter is reading the subject of Vayasar to be the arov itself, to turn away. It turned itself away. And that is one of the ways of reading it. When we looked at the last verse, the translations were split on whether the subject is the arov or God. Mm-hmm. Microphone, Elon.
What strikes me as something that I really like about this verse is really up until now, or as in our conversations, we've portrayed Moses as somewhat of a puppet / agent of God. But actually, if you read this verse, it says God did what Moses said he would do. So to me, I read it as Moses cut a deal with Pharaoh and God backed him up. Right, and it gives Moses more agency than in previous verses.
Interesting, yeah, because normally when someone is doing something kidvar someone else, it's Moshe doing something kidvar Adonai. It's God doing kidvar Moshe. Nice. I don't remember offhand. Any other comments on the verse itself before we look at the Rashi? Barry?
I want to back up a bit, going back in 24, where Pharaoh is asking Moshe, Hitiru Ba'adi, pray for me. But what's happening here is Moshe is said he's going to pray to God to remove the animals. There's no prayer for Pharaoh. And so the animals are left, are gone. But Pharaoh doesn't get his prayer.
Yeah, depending on what Hatiru Ba'adi means, right? If Hatiru Ba'adi means pray for me such that these plagues are removed from me, then it does. If Hatiru Ba'adi means add another prayer for me, then no. And if you remember, I think we looked at this, look at the Onkelos Han Hatiru Ba'adi, the end of verse 24. He says very interestingly, Salu af alai, pray Moshe even for me, meaning I'm not just asking for removal of the plague. I want you to say Mishaberach for me, right? That's not necessarily the only way to read the verse, because the af is not in the verse. So
in that regard, Moshe's not a puppet. Pharaoh's requiring something, but Moshe's deceiving him.
So it's unclear what exactly Pharaoh is asking. What we know is that what happened is that the plague gets removed. Let's look. Yes.
I think over there, I'm not very sure the line, but Pharaoh said, when you go, I will let you go for 3 days. And that's where he said, pray for me. When they are in the desert praying for God, also pray for him, because that happens with many people who are not the same religion, like you go to mosque or to church or to synagogue, your friend has a sick person or something, like, pray for me too.
Yeah.
I think that's where Pharaoh was saying.
Right. When I let you leave.
Yeah.
Yes.
He hasn't been there.
Okay.
Okay, let's look at the Rashi on verse 27. Marshall, you're up.
Vayasar ha'arov, v'lo metu kamosh and metu hatzvardeim. So he merely removed them, or he removed the swarm of animals. He merely removed them, and he did not die as the frogs had died.
Right. If you look back at verse 9, so this actually shows, Rick, that this is not the first Vayas Adonai Kedvar Moshe. Look at verse 9, Vayas Adonai Kedvar Moshe, that God did as Moshe had said, Vayamutu hatzvardaim. The frogs didn't disappear, they died. In fact, they died and created a smelly heap. Min habatim, from the houses, min hachatzerot, from the courtyards, min hasadot, from the fields, vayitzberu otam chomarim, they kind of piled them up into big heaps, vativ ash haaretz, and the land was smelly. So Rashi is saying, whatever the arov are, Rashi is saying, since the Torah could have told us that they died, because the Torah told us they died when it comes to the frogs, we should surmise that they didn't die, they just were removed. And it's interesting, his explanation as to why that's significant. Keep going.
Okay. She'im metu hayalahem hana'a be'orotam. For had they died, the Egyptians could have made some use of their skins.
Right. According to Rashi, arov is wild beasts.
Wild
right?
beasts.
Right. Not insects.
Not,
if they're
not insects.
Yeah. Right. So again, remember the pathway. Rashi, knowing the text by heart, notices a distinction between the way this plague ends and versus a previous plague end. We have been told in the past that the things that were plaguing Egypt died off. We're not told that here. Why are we not told that here? I have an answer, because nobody can do anything positive with smelly frogs in your piling up, right? But if these were wild animals, there's a whole lot you could do with the skins, and we don't want there to be like ancillary benefit to the Egyptians because the plague is over. And he's quoting from a midrash in Tanchuma. Yes.
Rashi was French, and he's not bringing up the legs.
Rashi, I guess, didn't like frog legs. Norm.
Alter's translation is consistent with the Rashi,
Okay.
because he says the Arov turned aside, which does not imply that they died, but that they left, and so they were gone.
Correct. It's a different verb, right? What was the previous one? What happened to the kinim? Hold on. How did the kinim leave? No, we got kinim. Kinim was the last one. Yeah, I feel like we never find out. Right, with the kinim, the Egyptian magicians try to do it and are not able to, but I don't think we ever find out what happens to the kinim. Right, verse 13, he hits the ground and there's a swarm. Verse 14, the Chatumim try v'lo yachol, they couldn't, which we talked about. What is it they couldn't do? They couldn't produce more lice upon their own people. Big deal. 15, the Chatumim say this must be God's hand, and his heart was hardened. And by 16, we're already moving towards the next plague. So it's interesting. In that plague, we're not told what happens to them. They just disappear. Maybe. Okay. Anything else in verse 27? Yes, Rebecca, and then Marshall.
Just a quick thing, since we were talking about frogs, I wanted to tell you that on Jeopardy last week, there was in the category of amphibians, the question was, although this biblical frog is the world's largest at around 12 inches long, its tadpoles are the same size as other frogs. Everybody should get this.
What is an Egyptian frog?
No. This large frog, you remember what it's called? Remember the large frog we talked about? Was it one frog because it was singular?
I know we looked at a picture of it. I forgot.
What is a Goliath frog?
A Goliath frog. Wow. Marshall.
Rabbi Kligfeld, I wonder if you can just, for benefit of the class, explain how the Vav HaHipuch works. Because here, and I know there's a change in the pronunciation where the accent is. As I read it, Vayasar ha'arov biparo, and it's not Vayasar.
Okay, so we do use the term Vav HaHipuch a lot. Literally, Vav HaHipuch means the Vav of switching, the Vav of reversing. And basically, it's a grammatical construct that takes a past tense verb and turns it into a future tense verb, or takes a future tense verb and turns it into a past tense verb, ergo the hipuch. And sometimes, depending on whether it's a 2-letter Hebrew root or a 3-letter Hebrew root, sometimes based on whether or not the last letter of the 3-letter root is a hey, sometimes based on whether any of the letters is a guttural, it changes it changes how much different that Vav HaHipuch version of the verb is going to look compared to a standard future tense, right? So if the verb lasur, to remove, is a pa'al, then the future would just be yisor or yisar, and in the Vav HaHipuch form, it's vayasar. To try to explain why every vowel is exactly the way it is would require me to resurrect my teacher, Professor David Avram Holtz, who passed away a few weeks ago, that we spoke about, and he would be able to give a better answer than I can. But on Vayasar? All right, I'll take the bait. Hold on a second. Ibn Ezra on verse 27. I don't have any Ibn Ezra on verse 27. The Dibor is Vayas. Milad Vayaser Zarab Dikduk. He says, we won't read the whole thing, but the verb Vayasar is a very strange word in grammar, and the way it's constructed is strange, and that's why it's ambiguous who the subject is. Yeah, I don't want to read the whole thing, but go Ibn Ezra. Okay, it's an Ibn Ezra kind of day. All right, do we dare do a third verse of the day? Unbelievable. Tova, you want to read verse 28? Let's get Tova on microphone.
Okay. Here.
Last verse of the chapter of chapter 8 of Exodus.
ויכבד פרעה את ליבו גם בפעם הזאת ולא שילח את העם. And Pharaoh hardened or made heavy his heart, just like the other time or that time, and he did not let the people go.
Okay, so here we have a verse where there's no hard Hebrew, there's no hard construct. We basically know what's being told to us, which makes it yet an even more interesting verse to ask upon it, what jumps out at you? Right? There are no hard forms. We know these words. Anything speak to you? Joel, and then Leonard. Hold on.
There are differences between shalach and shilach.
Good. Okay. So shilach is the past tense of the PL of the root lishaleach. Shalach would be the past tense of the pa'al form of shalach, which means lishloach, right? And that's also a hard verb because when the last letter is a chet, it changes some of the vowels. So we might say lishloach means to send, lishaleach means to like dispatch, to like send on a mission. And so, is there a reason why it's being?
What was Moshe asking when he says shlach? Is it pa or is it
PL? Because it would be shloach, it would be pa'al. Yeah. So I think it's been pretty consistent in PL. When was the last time that root shows up?
24.
Yeah. So and in 25, livilti shalach et ha'am. I think that is from a PL form because it would have been shloach et ha'am if it was pa'al. And although it's also the case that the way that verb is declined in modern Hebrew is different than it's in some ways than it was declined in, conjugated in biblical Hebrew. So it's hard to know exactly. But this one, shilach, is definitely PL, although I think in modern Hebrew it would be shileach, not shilach. I have to think about that. Okay, any other questions? Yes, Tova.
Not a question, and I know the point has been made before, but I just still find it elegant. Vaikabed paro et libo, right? Because it doesn't just mean harden, it means to be heavy. And of course, we have the image of the weighing of the heart, which is the central image of just being justified as a human being.
Yeah, probably more apt than our modern understanding of having a heavy heart, right? Because I don't know if that English idiom makes sense in an ancient way, because we do have it in English, but it's probably not what it meant here. But that's more interesting. The ritual.
It's bad because you're weighing on a balance against ma'at, against the feather of truth, when you're being judged after your death. And if it weighs down, if your heart is heavier than truth, that means it's weighted down by sin, basically, by having done evil things.
And again, the author could have written, he refused. He didn't have to say he hardened his heart. He could have said it 100 different ways. That he said no, but they chose the heart image because it was important to the Egyptians.
Yeah, maybe. Anyone else on the verse itself? Marshall, was your hand up before?
No.
Okay. So let's read what Rashi says. What Rashi is focusing on is the ambiguous bapam hazot, that time, right? Because the question we would ask immediately is, what's the antecedent? What's that time to which this verse is referring to, such that it's happening again? What's that time? Let's actually, before we read Rashi, what are the possibilities? When it says that Pharaoh hardened his heart, Gam bapam hazod, also on this time, what's the also
like in previous plague,
like his previous plague, right? Previous plague or previous plagues, right? It's interesting, and Rashi's going to disabuse us of the notion that it's the exact previous plague. Okay.
Yeah, we don't have the verse is missing in Silberman Rashi.
All right. All right. Let's see if it's on Safaria.
It is in Sapristi.
Interesting. So it's like maybe it's
Printing maybe problem.
Yeah, or a different tradition as to whether that exists. But usually, I don't have the Torah. Anyone have the Torah Chaim here? And it's not in the Torah Chaim, and it doesn't. Interesting, because the Torah Chaim is the most scholarly version of the Mikra Gdolot, and usually it would say like this doesn't appear in some manuscripts of Rashi, but it's going to include it. It's not there at all in Torah Chaim. But just because it doesn't appear,
probably takes more ink than the verse, than the comment itself.
Okay, so here's what some versions of Rashi have. Gam b'pa'am hazot. Since I have it in front of me, I'll read it. Afal pi she'amar anochi ashalach etchem lo kiyam haftachato. Okay, so even though he said, I'm going to dispatch you, as he said in the previous verses, lo kiyam haftachto, he didn't fulfill his promise. Rashi is saying a lot more here than it looks like he's saying. Okay, Rashi is trying to attach the pam hazot not to a plague but to a promise. In the previous plague, in the Kinim, we did not have God promising at any point to let them. Pharaoh. Pharaoh promising to let them go should the plague end. In fact, we don't, as we just discussed, we never really saw that plague dissipate. So the Pam Hazot is not like the last plague, but the last time that he promised, right? The last time Pharaoh promised, Pharaoh also didn't fulfill his promise. Also, this time, the promise, not the plague, the promise was not fulfilled. And I think you have to go back to Tzfardea, right? For the last time, he promises to let them go if it's removed, and it doesn't happen. Right? verse 11 of chapter 8. I want to look at that. Right. Vayar Paro ki hayta harbacha v'hachbedet libo. Pharaoh saw that there was some relief, and he hardened his heart. V'lo shama alehem kasher diber Adonai. He did not listen to them as God had said he would. So this is another breaking of a promise, not another similar end of a plague, because plague 4 ends differently than plague 3. Right? Is it earth-shattering? No, but Rashi is precise, and he doesn't want you to think that this is just connected to the previous plague, because the previous plague didn't end with a broken promise. Right. Rebecca? Let's get Rebecca a microphone. Can I see the Torah time while you're doing that?
Yeah, I had noticed that that in 11, after the frogs, Pharaoh had hardened his heart, but then after the lice, the kinim, it used the word Pharaoh's heart was hardened. So almost thinking that, was it God who hardened his heart? Which, I kind of seem to remember learning God is the one who hardened Pharaoh's heart. So his heart was hardened, but now we're back to Pharaoh hardening his heart. So who is it that's really doing the hardening?
Yeah, and it's the most important moral question of all these chapters, right? Is Pharaoh responsible for his recalcitrance, and therefore whatever he suffers because he made the decision? Or is Pharaoh a puppet who's being punished for something that God is forcing him to do? And it's very hard to untie that knot. Hold on one second, Norman Allen. Unsurprisingly, the Torah Chaim, which again is the most scholarly version, academic version of this, on the previous Rashi, on verse 27, which we read by Yasar Ha'erov, that the wild beast didn't die, and because otherwise they would be able to use their skins. There's a footnote on that in this version, and the footnote says, Bidfus Rishon Leta, in the first printing of Rashi, the previous Rashi, not this one, doesn't appear. Uvim Komo, and instead of it, Ita, we have our comment. So the ones who are annotating this version of Rashi are aware that both these comments exist, but they're saying in the first printing of Rashi, the one we're reading now exists and not the previous one. And yet they've chosen to reverse it and print the one from the previous verse and not this one, because their scholarship suggests that that is the most accurate version of Rashi, but they're aware that both of them exist. So there are printed versions of Rashi, or the earliest printing of Rashi has the Rashi we're reading now, but not the Rashi in the previous verse. Okay. There were 3 hands, Norm, Alan, and then Marshall.
To address Rebecca's question directly, as I recall it, sometimes it says that Pharaoh hardens his heart, sometimes it suggests God hardens Pharaoh's heart, and sometimes it simply isn't mentioned at all.
Yeah. There's a wonderful comment in one of the pages of the Eitz Chaim Chumash in the Drash commentary. I forgot who it's attributed to. Maybe it's unattributed, in which case it's just Harold Kushner. That makes the argument that you can see a pattern that over the first couple of plagues, it's Pharaoh hardening his heart, and in the last couple of plagues, it's God hardening his heart. And the Midrashic explanation is, if you do something long enough, you become habituated to it, and then it's almost as if God is doing it for you, because you can't leave that pattern, right? So, but you're responsible for having allowed yourself to be habituated to it, right? Bad behavior they get used to is very hard to undo, right? So at some point it becomes as if God is doing it to you, not that God is forcing you, but the way God created human behavior is that the 17th time you do the wrong thing, it's very hard to turn around. Alan, then Marshall.
Yeah. That's where I was going in terms of that word, but it's surprising because that was like the first 5 were going to be he hardened his own heart, and the second 5 it's that God did. But yet we have an exception here, because it appears that, as Rebecca was saying, that on the prior plague it was dealing with that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Is that?
Well, I don't think we have any hardening when the lice are out, right? Oh yeah, verse 15, Vayachazak lev paro. That right? It's not that he hardened his heart, but that his heart was hardened. It's sort of a passive hardening. Yeah. All right, Marshall.
I'm always interested in looking at various translations, and here are 3 of them. The first is from the Contemporary Torah, But Pharaoh became stubborn this time also, comma, and would not let the people go. Second one is from the Silberman. And Pharaoh hardened his heart at this time also, comma, neither would he let the people go.
Okay.
And then Robert Alter, and Pharaoh hardened his heart this time, comma, two, comma.
Two T-O-O.
Right. And he did not send off the people.
The Koran translation puts in the neither, like the second one you read. Just share the screen. Koran is, and Paro hardened his heart at this time also, neither would he let the people go. Everett Fox. But Pharaoh made his heart heavy with stubbornness this time as well, and he did not send the people free. Kaplan, any interesting ones over there, Larry? Larry's gone? Oh, okay.
I don't have Kaplan in front of me. I'm sorry.
What did he say?
I don't have Kaplan in front of me today. I'm sorry.
Got it. Okay. All right, that takes us to 9:30. So next week we'll start chapter 9. If you want to look ahead, you know, we're making progress. We're a couple of pages away from the 7th Aliyah, but we have the end of Va'era in our sights. Someone asked me before, the room is full. Will classes not be taking place over winter break? I'm here. So I'm next week, the 20th, the following week, 27th, the following week, the 3rd. Some of you may individually be traveling, but class will be taking place. Chag Urim Sameach, Chodesh Tov, Happy Tevet. Have a good day.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.